Right, good evening, councillors. I'd say good evening to the members of the public, except that they're lacking. So we'll move swiftly on to something that we would have debated in May, but there were issues around that. And somehow, one way or another, we either haven't had meetings or it hasn't been on the agenda, but we finally got an item on there to look at our terms of reference. And in fact, what Police has just done is hand out a hard copy to everybody because there wasn't one in the pack. As you will notice from the handwritten bit on the bottom, this was looked at just over 12 months ago. I know that at some point, either just before May or just after the May meeting, I'd come up with something to add into the terms of reference, which for the life of me I cannot remember, nor can I find the email in which I thought I had sent it to Lisa, who has no recollection of receiving it anyway. But I don't think I'm imagining it. But anyway, as I can't tell you what it was, we can't possibly include it. Unless we just put a sort of question mark and fill it in with whatever we want, whenever we want to. So just have a quick look through it. And after you've done so, I'll just mention something that Councillor Chesser raised with me a couple of minutes ago.
And the thing that slightly bothers me is the penultimate paragraph. All councillors may be members of the committee.
Funny that you should say
membership should be, as a minimum, comprise half of all serving councillors, to include the town mayor and or the deputy mayor. I'm just a bit lost as to what that sentence means. Does it mean that, as a minimum, we should have...
We should have half of the number of councillors that we have,
which means
which as of the last full council meeting was increased to 14 councillors, so half of that is 7. And if you look very carefully at this, we do have 7 members.
Then this means we've got to get another one, because we just co-opted another 2, didn't we not?
No, because we only had 12 councillors.
No, that's right. Sorry, we lost 2.
Having lost 2, so half of that was 6.
So that's fine. So
technically we're all right.
It's a bit of a gobbledygook. So I think it should read, membership should, as a minimum, comprise half of all serving councillors, comma, and must include either the town mayor or deputy. I think that, to me, because it...
Well, we could make it an either or. I mean, this way it reads that it will include one or the other or both.
Yeah, and it's a bit odd. I just think the sentence needs to be a bit tightened up. It's not entirely clear. And the other issue that concerns me, the membership should be elected at the annual meeting. It concerns me, so if you take the Estates Committee, the people we elected at the annual meeting, we've lost 2, if not 3 of them, well, 3 of them already, since the annual meeting, which then puts us under huge pressure to remain in court.
Quite. I have a feeling that a similar clause is probably in the terms of reference of all the committees. However, you're quite right, because actually it should say that initially membership should be elected at the annual meeting, but thereafter councillors can be elected to the committee at any full council meeting.
Or co-opted if need be, or I don't know. I worry that because that sentence is, I believe, in the estates one as well, we're in a real mix, basically.
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't turn up, that's it, we're out of court.
So that's why it's the same thing I
It was
brought
exactly
up,
what
David.
Councillor Chester was saying to
And
me
I
just before
think
we
if you
opened the meeting.
say elect, it's a bit dangerous because it means you've got to have an election rather than co-opting
Well, one could say, going back to my original phraseology, the initial membership shall be elected at the annual meeting.
Yes, I'm happy about that.
However, at any subsequent full meeting of the council, a councillor or councillors can be added to the committee.
That's a different
Because
point.
by saying it that way round, we don't determine how they're added.
But that could mean that a one-off, where if nobody's going to be there, you could say, look, will you come? Because that's the sentence that says that all councillors are members of the committee.
No, all councillors may be members of the committee, not are members of the committee.
Yeah, but therefore,
To give the
come on,
opportunity
come on.
for anybody to come.
yeah,
And of course, we've always said that any councillor can attend these meetings.
yeah.
The other way of doing it is actually being very precise, and that, again, you're the lawyer, David, you can advise us accordingly. So we normally want to do exactly what it says, to elect the committee or the membership at the annual meeting. The problem we boxed ourselves in with estates is that since then, 3 members have stood down. So it might be, we could add a sentence saying, should any member subsequently stand down from the committee, full council can re-elect not substitute, that's
Not re-elect,
but
elect.
elect
Or appoint, which is it going to be?
appoint.
Appointing would be,
Appoint, and slightly with the words, So
Yeah.
should elector stand down during,
Well, it's not only standing down though, is it? Because in theory, as everybody is entitled to be a member, for example, we've just co-opted 2 new councillors. And it may be that one of them would wish to come on to
and we wouldn't want to stop it.
and we certainly wouldn't want to stop it.
and I don't think we ever have.
So I think one would just be saying something to the effect of that, and at any subsequent full council meeting,
well, how about that? A new sentence saying, full council can elect new members to the committee as required.
Yeah.
Council meeting, new members may be appointed to the committee.
Because that could be.
Right.
So it's more and less precise.
No,
That could mean that if we've got a big, there's a sudden planning thing that somebody's got an interest in, they can come on as required with specialist knowledge.
Would councillors be happy for me to draft that paragraph again, circulate it after tonight, because I think we've got a clear idea, make sure that you're all, as it were, content with it, and then we can actually...
I think it's also, sorry, Ian has pulled out the estate's terms of reference, which has a slightly different wording, and I just think it would be useful if our terms of references are the same,
broadly similar
across the committees.
Yes, I would endorse that, having written 2 terms of references recently. I think if we can get standardised wording for that phrase, you know,
It ought to be the same.
make it work. I think we really,
So,
Because they all have the same intent.
Yeah.
But they end up in fight.
so the estates, just so you know, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
I haven't got it in front of me, so.
Send it to you. It says membership to comprise the town mayor and or deputy town mayor, and no more than 7 members appointed at the annual meeting. But again, it
Which
doesn't
is
have any
almost the
ability
complete
to
opposite.
reappoint. Yeah.
Yes, I mean,
because that means.
So-
Which do we want?
Well, I can take out the word elected and change it to appointed, which has, I suspect it means exactly the same, but at least it's the same wording. So the way I've written it down at the moment is all councillors may be members of the committee.
Yeah,
Membership
Yeah.
should include the town mayor and or the deputy mayor, and as a minimum comprise half of all serving councillors. Initially, the membership should be appointed at the annual meeting, and at any future full council meeting, a new member may be appointed to the committee.
Yeah. The difference with estates is no more than 7.
Yes.
Whereas it's the minimum.
So,
Yes, and I think the reasoning was that we wanted really to encourage as many councillors as possible to involve themselves in planning, which is why it was framed in the way it was. I mean, it may be a hostage to fortune because at the moment, as we've observed, there are 7 members of this committee, which fulfills that point. However, if somebody were to leave us,
I know.
we then wouldn't, on the face of it, be able to comply with our own terms of reference, query what happens. Unless, of course, one reduces from half of all serving committee members to, for the sake of argument, a third of all serving
I think it
councillors.
would be helpful if the clauses were the same and fairly standardised.
right.
But that then brings into conflict the
which,
principle of having all councillors able to be members of this committee to restricting the number of people who can be the members of this committee. I mean, maybe,
All I'm saying is that
but I suppose bear in mind, the terms of reference would go to full council for approval. We could flag this as being something where full council might want to have a view around whether we change that idea and go to a minimum number of councillors, however many it be, and remove the thing that says that it should, as a minimum, comprise half of the councillors, while still allowing any councillor to be a member of the committee. And you could do that.
yeah,
Could we also use the word normally quite a lot? So normally,
yeah.
and normally no more. So
I mean, I suppose one could include, I didn't expect to get bogged down on this, where it says Standing Order 18 shall apply for the committee to be quorate, one could say, and so long as the meeting is quorate, it shall not, or a meeting shall not be prevented from going ahead by reason of the membership not comprising half of all serving councillors. And it's getting more and more and more long-winded, but that will deal with that point. I mean, I think just putting normally in is a bit of a hostage to fortune,
Well,
but that would deal with it. But it does become a very long.
you have to say may go ahead, because you can't say we can necessarily, because you can't make decisions if you're not quorum.
No, we're not saying that it goes ahead if it's not quorate. We do have a provision that covers that. What I'm saying is there's a difference between the number required to be quorate and our terms of reference, which say that there should be effectively a minimum of 7 members. And one way around that would be to say, well, even if it, in fact, the fact that it does drop below that minimum would not of itself prevent the committee meeting, as so long as it is quorate.
The other thing is, again, in terms of commonality, the Estates Committee terms of agenda, terms of reference, says quite explicitly to be quorum, you have to have a minimum of 3 members.
As opposed to referring to standing order
Whereas
18.
this refers to standing order 18, and you're thinking, well, yeah, but
What does standing
what does
order
that actually
18
say?
say?
You know, my point is that rather than referring to yet another document, it should be.
Well, I get that. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what it says
Well, that's
for
my point. So
F&GP and Human Resources Committees.
I just think they just need to be a bit tidied up. And maybe this is a matter for actually the next annual meeting, that we make sure that there's consistent wording
Across
across
the committees.
And we tidy this up, because we're now almost halfway into the year, to bide us through, you see what I mean? I think there's a danger that we're trying to do a bigger job in terms of uniformity. We want uniformity. Let's put that on the agenda for the next town meeting. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
And just get this workable for the next 6 months.
I'll go back to what I said then. I'll circulate a revised version of that penultimate paragraph, because that seems to be the only thing we're looking at changing. And subject to everybody saying, yes, that'll do to put to full council. We can put it to full council, and at full council we could actually make the observation that there is no standardisation in relation to the committees, it would appear, certainly none between this and estates management at any rate. I'll have a check of the other ones.
I think that's fair enough.
Right. Okay. Not quite where I anticipated being, but never mind.
There's no such thing as a short agenda.
We'll get it right eventually. I think any hope of finishing inside 30 minutes has probably gone out the window. That moves us on to receiving and accepting apologies for absence, which come from the Mayor, Councillor Wade and Councillor Fuller. Do we accept those apologies?
Yes.
Representations of interested parties, there are none. Declarations of interest, well, in terms of the actual planning applications, since there's only one to trouble us, albeit there's a lot of other things on the agenda. Does anybody have any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests? Minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of July have been circulated. Present myself, Councillor Chesser, Councillor Clark and Councillor Quartermain. Anybody want to propose those?
No, I'll propose, yeah.
Second them, Councillor Quartermain, all those in favour? Seems to be all of us. Right, planning application. As soon as I saw this one, I thought, that looks familiar. And indeed, it is, because a very similar application came before us at our May meeting. That application included that door and windows. That application was refused by NNC, And this new application has been put in, but relates only to the front door.
Yep.
I couldn't believe, as I started to do my report for this meeting, that it would end up being a page and a half on a door. But I think it actually is worth looking at it in a certain amount of detail. Our initial view, so far as the door was concerned, was we didn't think that the door had any particular merit. And our attitude was, so long as the conservation officer doesn't worry about it, that's fine by us, but if he doesn't like it, we object. The conservation officer didn't like it. Historic England in particular didn't like it. Perhaps somewhat predictably, Historic England did not like the fact that there was a paucity of detail in the original application. There was nowhere that said, for example, that the door was an original door or one that was installed in the last century or anything. And this lack of information about the door and the need to replace it prompted Historic England to write a long report, most of which I just extracted and printed out for you, as to the advice it was giving to the council. Given that the conservation officer's view was pretty much in line with Historic England's, it's not too surprising that the application was then rejected on the basis that what was proposed might cause significant harm to a building of merit. This, of course, being a Grade 2 star listed building, opposite a Grade 1 listed building and a Scheduled Ancient Monument. It doesn't, in a sense, get much more special than that. You might have thought against that background that the applicant would pull out the stops to plug the gaps that had been identified in the first application. The application is supported by a design and access statement, which is relatively short. And I've basically quoted from the design and access statement and highlighted the fact that they show a number of photographs showing the condition of the door. There is nothing in that design and access statement which says how old the door is. And although the design and access statement claims that the door is beyond repair, having had a number of professional repairs in the past, there is no report from any specialist to say that. And there's no indication that the conservation officer has, for example, been called in to come and have a look at it and advise them on whether or not the conservation officer thinks that it's beyond repair. So we still don't know, frankly, from the applicant, whether or not this door has any particular merit. It's clearly not in good nick. And according to the applicant, it actually is letting in a draft. And the rationale is to have a new door that outwardly looks the same as the existing door, painted up in the same colours, but with heritage double glazing installed. But the advice of Historic England to NNC had been, if at all possible, we should be looking at repair and secondary glazing rather than replacement. And to my mind, there's nothing in that application that suggests the applicant has realistically addressed those issues. And that being the case, and bearing in mind that our first reaction was, well, as long as the conservation officer's happy, we're happy. Conservation officer wasn't happy, and we now have the advantage of knowing that Historic England aren't happy. And if this really doesn't appear to meet the requirements or either we should probably object to the application, setting out why we don't think that the applicant has made out its case yet, and echoing Historic England that if it is capable of being repaired, it should be repaired with as much original material being retained as possible, and investigate the use of secondary glazing rather than double glazing. And then if the applicant can demonstrate that the door is of no particular merit and neither is its materials, and that realistically replacement is the only option, well, no doubt, with a degree of reluctance, the conservation officer will go along with it, and presumably Historic England will. There were no comments on the portal as of Sunday morning when I looked at it and did the report. I don't know whether there's any since.
No, still.
But one assumes that Historic England are going to comment again. And whilst I think I probably preempted what they're likely to say, I just can't see them being any happier this time around than they were last. Thoughts, anyone?
I think I would probably concur with your views. There's nothing that I can see within this that shows that there's been any work done. I think if there'd been more evidence to see that there's been an attempt at repair and the door is sort of unrepairable, I think that would be a different question.
Anybody else?
Well, I'll try.
Floor is yours.
Well, I mean, I can see the point from a safety point of view. I've got a door that's like shell and I need to change it. It's been so worn down by the weather. And it's a very public bit of road that, I would be worrying if I had such a door. And I want a nice strong one made of modern materials. So the other bit I would add to that is that a door is a door. You can take it away again if they really want it to be in limit. What the word now? When it was listed.
Mm.
But you can take it away again. It's not going to assault the actual building in any way. It's not like
there's
taking a window out and
there's
putting another
no
one in.
structural change to the building.
Absolutely.
And the materials to be used, with the exception of the double glazing, they tell us, are going to be on a like-for-like basis.
That's my view. But I mean, the other side of it is that if it's listed, we know it's listed and it has to be as it was when it was listed. But I still think, on balance, for myself, I would feel that they should be allowed to put a warm-up door in.
Hi. Max?
Well, I mean, you've written a very full report, David, and I don't really have any reason to deviate from kind of what you're saying already. Part of it is the nature of the application itself and the information they give or they don't give, which kind of leads you to want to refuse it on the basis of inappropriate information. I kind of get where Val is coming from, that a door is not part of a structural thing, but doors are of architectural interest as well, if you see what I mean. The usual thing is we would say repair rather than replace. They haven't demonstrated why they can't repair it.
Ian, anything to add?
Not hugely. I suppose if it was my door, I think this is frustrating, but then I'd probably want the process to be as smooth as possible and I'd give as much information on my second point as I could. I'm just wondering if there's a wording that we can say that we object to it as it stands, but if the conservation officer is convinced we support.
Yes, I mean, it's almost the reverse of the way we put it the last time, and I'm quite happy with that, because it is the fact that Historic England and the Conservation Officer had these issues with it that we thought was possible, that we said what we said. I mean, this could just turn out to be one of those applications that comes back a third time, and hopefully by the time it comes back before us, our concerns have been answered, perhaps simply with an expert's report that says actually this door is only 100 years old, it has no great merit, and it's beyond repair. And frankly, at that point, we'd have just said, so be it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay. Well, I think therefore we object with the caveat that if in fact the Conservation Officer was happy, we would in effect withdraw our objection, whilst perhaps expressing the view that we think it's unlikely that the Conservation Officer will be satisfied for the reasons we
Well,
outlined.
unless there is solid evidence that they can show.
Yeah, which certainly isn't there on the portal. Just by way of an observation, when we get applications that involve a property that I know we've already looked at, and I knew we had, one of the things I do is go back onto the portal to look at what our previous comment was. We simply saved me rummaging around in my files upstairs, except that when I went to do that, I wasn't there. It's odd because in the report to the committee, which led to the refusal, it actually refers to what we'd said. So they clearly had it, but for whatever reason, it didn't appear on the portal. I would therefore like us to just take that up with NNC and say, well, how did that happen? But when we put in a comment, we do expect to see it on there so that people who are interested can see what we're saying. Councillor Clark.
Haven't they just done something? Haven't NNC reset their portal?
They have. So from
I'm missing.
a date in August, which might have been the 20th, but it's somewhere around there, you now go to the combined NNC portal instead of the East Northants portal. So everything that predates a particular date, you look at on the East Northants portal, a kind of legacy one, as I think they're now describing it. And all the new stuff, as it starts to come through the system, will pick up off the new NNC site. And of course, initially, inevitably, I put the reference into the portal, thinking, oh, it'll be on the new system then, and discovered that the application had obviously gone in under the old system, and so I had to actually go back to the ENC one to find it, or East Northants kind of division. Anyway, if we could perhaps just follow that up and see. In terms of planning outcomes, they're all set there. We made similar comments about two applications involving trees subject to TPOs, broadly speaking, saying, well, we're not really very happy with it, but as long as the tree officer is happy, so be it. And the tree officer clearly was sufficiently happy because they were both granted. We might almost have all forgotten that predating the 50 house development on off Stokedale Road by the cemetery, there was an application for an extension to the Warren Bridge site. Councillors may recall that, in fact, this bit of land we're now talking about was in one ownership, and the other bit of land was in another ownership and then acquired by David Wilson Homes. And this application had come up, and we had objected, and police had sent around with this because it was quite a lot of objections, so rather than attempting to put it into the agenda, we sent it out as a separate thing. But rather in line with what tends to happen with any development of any size in Ample to which we object, it's got permission. I suppose that frankly it was now more likely, bearing in mind that they granted permission for the 50 houses, if you like, the other side of the divide. But it does therefore mean that there are now 59 houses around that part of the world. And essentially that bit of land is now going to be completely developed. So 59 there, 130 on Cotterstock Road, that's 189, 130 off St Christopher's Drive, which is 319, and a 41 bedroom place off Herne Road, so that's 360 new dwellings during a relatively short period of time.
15%.
It's a huge increase without any apparent increase in any of the infrastructure of this town. Which makes the failure of NNC to engage with us in our discussions about a possible new attempt at a neighbourhood plan all the more frustrating. But they simply don't. Anyway, that takes us on effectively to PC 2539, which is a complaint about the development that we've just been talking about from Mrs. Dakin. Again, we've had a copy of that circulated, and we can see that her frustration about contractor A digging up the road, going away after reinstating it, only for a little later contractor B to come along and dig up the road and cause more chaos, and in this case followed by contractor C doing the same thing. And she sets out a kind of catalogue of issues and then sets out the response she wants, including perhaps somewhat ambitiously a reduction in her council tax. I can see where she's coming from, but I wish her luck with that. But actually on a wider point, this has been brought to our attention because it was sent in to the clerk and it's now ended up on our agenda. It might therefore be appropriate for this committee of the council to say something to the lady about matters, and if we were to share some of her concerns, the question then is, how do we take it forward, bearing in mind that recently any approach to the planning department seems to be ignored almost entirely, which would suggest to me that if we are going to say anything about it as a council, our better approach would be to raise it with the 3 NNC councillors. And so we are happy. We've given up attempting to write directly to the planning department because we get no feedback whatsoever. So will you please take these matters up with them and report back to us? As you would have gathered from that, I have a degree of sympathy with what the lady says, and I don't live anywhere near it. Other councillors' views about how we respond to this, if at all?
I wonder whether it's worthwhile bringing it to the attention of one of our, I'm trying to think what they're called, ward representatives. Particularly since we have 2 new ward members, they might want to use whatever powers of persuasion they have to raise it. There is very little that we as a council can do about any of these things. It may be that we could broker a meeting between the developer and local residents. That said, I'm entirely unconvinced that that would resolve anything. But, you know, we've said this before, we've said it in relation to this particular developer. they're doing all sorts of things when they shouldn't, moving in equipment on a Sunday. I remember was one of them. There was another issue which escapes me now. And the developer unfortunately seems to believe that they can do whatever they want. What we don't seem to have is any powers to hold them to account or police them.
We clearly do not have those powers. However, if there are breaches of planning permission in the sense, for example, of breaches of a construction and management plan, in theory, an NC could and should do something. However, one of our number will observe that on a development not a million miles from his home, there have been innumerable breaches of construction management plans from almost day one, with seemingly no response worth the name from an NC at all. Having said that, one of our roles is clearly to, if you like, champion the interests of our parishioners. And the thought of saying, well, we could try to see if the developer would be prepared to engage with the council and affected members of that community, and we could make potentially this room available, for example, for such a meeting, which, if it were in the evening, we could probably deal with, and if it was during the day, I might have to ask somebody else to help me out. But that's certainly a thought, and I'm sure echoes my view that we have to involve the ward councillors in this. Councillor Clark.
I was, having read the letter, I went back to the only time that planning enforcement has looked at formally the Constock Meadows, based in 2022, and in their final thing, they suggested a meeting with the chair of the local planning committee. And so I looked up, because it's all now one planning committee, isn't it? So I looked at Councillor Chris Kellett's details, and it might be worth us flagging it direct with him, because it's an issue of planning enforcement, and there's nothing we can do, but if we asked him what his committee could do.
Yes, I suppose we could contact him, copying in our 3 ward councillors, so they're aware, and then if we do not get a response, we can ask them to take it up with him directly. That sounds like a plan.
And the only other thing to add, I do think, although I have huge sympathy with this resident, they need to be realistic about what is achievable and what isn't. So, number 2, confirmation of any future planned without binding timetables. That's just simply not going to happen.
You're right, of course it won't.
And it's not going to happen not because there's no desire, it's not going to happen because you cannot do it as a builder, because they're reliant on all number of third parties. So, there are certain things, here where there needs to be a bit of realism.
Yes, and perhaps if we were to communicate with her, we could say, look, we don't think that is specifically achievable, but what we could be saying is that the developer should, as soon as it is in a position to do so, ensure that residents are properly notified of things and given estimated timescales and all the rest of it, because that is perfectly feasible.
But that's slightly different to what's being asked.
It's different from what the lady wants, but you're right, what the lady wants and what the lady is likely to get are sadly 2 different things. Councillor Clark.
Just on that basis, is it also worth asking her if she has contact details for the site manager? Because I know it's incredibly, I've become an expert looking at building some gates now, and 98% of gates have a site manager phone number, contact details. It's just the ones around Amble, so it would be good to know if David Wilson Homes have provided like residents with information.
Yes. Yes, it would be, because I suppose, looking forward, one of the things that we could constantly say to planners is, look, as a planning condition, affected residents should be given the contact details of somebody on site with responsibility that they can make contact with in the event of difficulties. And that really shouldn't be rocket science.
No, it's been a great frustration for residents near another property nearby, that we don't have those details. And we can phone an emergency number in Kent that says it doesn't know where we are, and that's it. So, hopefully other buildings are better. Maybe they enforce this.
Yeah. Councillor Chester?
No, nothing else.
Councillor Courtney? Right, so I'll draft something to go back to Mrs. Dakin. And I'll draft something, if we can find Councillor Kellett's email, which I'm sure we'll be able to from somewhere.
I've just sent it to you and.
Right. I can draft something to then go to Councillor Kellett, which we can then send on to our 3 ward councillors. Right. PC 2540 simply says to receive information from NCALC, a guide for parish and town councils in Northamptonshire on pre-application developer interactions. That's been circulated. It was basically circulated for information purposes. If we want to talk about it at all, we could talk about it now, we could put it on a future agenda if somebody wants to explore what's in there, but it is simply a guide which may assist us in due course.
I thought we had received this document at full council before, but maybe not.
I don't know, is the short answer. You could be right. I don't remember seeing it.
No, I don't remember.
But that's not to say that it isn't
It was
there.
on my report to full council about the rugby ground. I referenced it in that.
That's interesting.
Maybe you'd be super keen. That's my one.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll probably never get to the bottom of that one. So we've got it. I'll add it to my ring binder of useful bits and pieces. And if we need it, we need it. Right. NNC Community Governance Review and decide next steps. This was before full council the other week, and has ended up in our lap. To refresh people's memory about it, NNC want to conduct a review of arrangements for parishes within North Northamptonshire. This follows a boundary commission review, which affected the parliamentary seat, and of course it also follows the division of Northamptonshire County Council into 2 unitary authorities, North and West Northants. And they published, following a meeting in August of the relevant committee, a draft timetable for the work on this, with the first phase of consultation being in January of next year for, I think, a 6-week period, then an analysis of what they've got, and then a second phase of consultation before they move on to a point where they may be seeking changes. These changes are twofold. One, the possibility of changing the number of elected representatives for a particular ward or parish. And I seem to recall that we had discussed the possibility of reducing the size of the council from its present 14 to 12, partially in response to the difficulties we're having in having 14 councillors, although we are now back up to a full complement despite having lost 2 councillors in relatively short order. So we may want to think about that further, but I think there has been a full council decision on it, but I think that was probably more than 6 months ago, which means that from a standing orders point of view, that could be looked at further. But that's really not an issue, I would say, for this committee. It's very much a full council issue. What is arguably an issue for this committee is parish boundaries themselves, because to some extent it seems to fit in neatly with our role of planning. And there are some very clear anomalies around the existing parish boundaries. This time we've got a certain amount of notice, which may enable us to make a rather better job of this than the last time we attempted to. And I can see the odd smile around the table, because last time this happened, which I think was 2018, we discovered that we got about 2 weeks within which to make some representations, which we then did. But of course we did it without any of our neighbouring councillors being aware of what we were doing or why we were doing it. And we contrived to upset almost every single one of them to a greater or lesser extent. Because we now have more notice of matters, it may be possible for this council, if it takes that decision, to discuss with, or at least advise, affected councillors of the sort of things that we may end up asking for. Now, of course, we don't ask for any changes. We don't really need to consult anybody. But were we to ask for changes, and I have to say that I think we should, then there are, in particular, I suspect, 3 local councils that would be affected. In no particular order, I'll start with Ashton. As councillors will recognise, the boundary between Oundle and Ashton is effectively the river, which means that if you move out of Oundle over the bridge to hit the 605 to go to Peterborough or indeed to Thrapston, you pass out of Oundle and into the parish of Thrapston, wherein lies the Riverside Public House, and no, we're not going to talk about that tonight. But there is also the Laxton Drive development on the other side of the road. And in 2018, we suggested that on the basis that the residents there almost certainly thought of themselves as being in Oundle, and would certainly look to Oundle rather than the small village of Ashton, and would use the facilities of Oundle, that they probably should be part of Oundle. Politically, there is a difficulty, or at least there certainly was then, which was that if Ashton Parish lost the households on that development, it would cease to be entitled to have a parish council and would have to become a parish meeting, which it wasn't at all keen on at the time. Since which point, Ashton Parish Council has had all sorts of problems in trying to keep itself alive. But it could be argued that the river does form a relatively natural boundary, and that even though the development might well look to Oundle and all the rest of it and probably be seen by any passing traffic as being part of Oundle rather than part of Ashton, because you get to the roundabout and you see you're entering Oundle, and the sign points you off down the Polebrook Road in the vague direction of Ashton, which appears to be somewhere else in Tufnelly. So that's one place that we should be thinking about. A second place I would suggest we should think about, and again we did this on the last occasion, was that there is a natural boundary between Barnwell and Oundle, which is not reflected by the parish boundary. In this case, the natural boundary is arguably the A605 itself. Because the village of Barnwell lives on one side of it, but half of Barnwell parish is the other side of the A605 and encompasses, amongst other places, the Barn Garden Centre, the mill, which has had a number of names, but is, I think, generally known as the Mill at Oundle, the Barnwell Country Park, which is known as the Barnwell Country Park, and the Oundle Marina, which is known as the Oundle Marina, and is technically in Barnwell. There seems to be very little logic to any of that. And there is an argument for adjusting the boundary in such a way as it would include within the parish of Oundle those areas I've just described. The impact on Barnwell would actually be minimal because, of course, the number of actual residential properties contained in that area is, it's a handful. The advantage would be that Oundle Marina would be in Oundle. We know that there have been plans to develop Oundle Marina. People have come and talked to us about it from time to time. At some point, I am sure we are going to see some sort of a planning application in relation to it. But perhaps in a sense, the key thing there is the Barnwell Country Park, which is much used by residents of Oundle, is controlled by NNC, which is fine, so long as some bright spark at NNC doesn't get the idea that it's too expensive and wants to close it down or sell it off. Arguably, if it were in our parish, it might be rather easier for us to resist that, or even conceivably take it under our own ownership and control. So there's a debate to be had around that, I would venture to suggest. Perhaps the most obvious anomaly, however, lies in the boundary between the parishes of Glapthorne and Oundle. Actually, the boundary is such that as you go out of Oundle towards Glapthorne, on your left-hand side, you pass Old Farm Lane, which appears for all the world to be part of the built environment of Oundle, but is actually technically in Glapthorne because the boundary runs just the Oundle side of that, if you see what I mean. As a result, there is already a coalescence between the built environment of Glapthorne and the built environment of Oundle, albeit that there's then a green stretch between there and the house that's known as Leverton, in the garden of which a new property is in the course of construction. Glapthorne has a neighbourhood plan which says at all costs there should be no coalescence and we want to maintain a green strip between ourselves and Oundle, to maintain our distinct identity, which is partly helped by the existence of a development at Old Farm Lane. And even perhaps more surprisingly, part of the development of Cotterstock Road, St Peter's Road, known as Cotterstock Meadows, part of that lies in the parish of Glapthorne, part of it lies in the parish of Oundle. The boundary between the two on the ground, you simply can't work out where it is. It actually passes through at least one property, so it's partially in one parish and partially in the next. And just beyond that, of course, is the water treatment plant, stroke sewage works, which again, technically, while serving Oundle, is not in the parish of Oundle. And clearly, that has absolutely nothing to do with the built environment of the village of Blackthorn, where you would have to drive down the Cotterstock Road, turn right, and drive down until you hit the village. Most of the development being then off on your left-hand side, although there is a strip of development along the Blackthorn / Southwick roads. And so there is arguably a case around that. The issue, it seems to me, for this committee is, do we think that as a council, we should be recommending to full council that we do look to put forward changes to the boundary? If so, what are we going to do in terms of what are those suggestions going to be? And what, if anything, do we do about being as open as possible, if I can use a relatively neutral terminology, with affected councils? Those are the questions and the background. Probably in saying it, I've made my own sort of views, personal views, very clear. But this isn't about my personal view, it's about a view of the committee first and foremost that will then have to go to full council. Essentially, a timescale is such that we could have this on the agenda in October and November and December, should we choose, because we wouldn't be pushing forward anything until some date in January, but I suspect that would be before our January planning meeting and quite possibly before our January full council meeting. So in a sense, if we were to do it, we would need by our December meeting, more of which are none, to have come to a view. I've talked at you for several minutes, long enough for Councillor Chester to leave the room and return.
Sorry if I...
No. I merely made the point that I've been talking for ages, so I think now time that somebody else had the opportunity to respond to what I've just been saying. Councillor Pope, sure.
I'm not entirely sure, Chair, what you're kind of wanting us to decide. I'm just trying to actually remind myself what the agenda issue is. Discuss
and decide.
So we're discussing it. So you've introduced the situation in some detail. If you want the issue is really, as you say, the boundary to do with three parishes, Barnwell, Ashton and Blackthorn. My view is I wouldn't touch Ashton, I wouldn't touch Barnwell. It might be worth doing something about Blackthorn. That's my personal view. I think if well, there are various reasons why I wouldn't touch either Barnwell or Ashton, but the main reason is because it's like lobbing a hand grenade into either of those two parishes.
Well, I would agree with what you said. I'm not in favour of suggesting that we have anybody merge with us. People are quite proud of their locality, in my view.
So just so I'm clear, so you're saying don't suggest any revision to any of the boundaries?
Correct.
Right. We've got your hands up. We're going to go to both of you. Councillor Quartermain first.
I think my memory serves me right from full council, the mayor was actually going to informally approach the various councils.
The idea was that there was this A605 forum and he was going to try and use that to discuss it. Unfortunately, he's not here tonight and I don't know where that is and what timescales for that might be.
I was just thinking from that, if there was any sort of feedback, I think we see there's maybe areas which would benefit all of us or benefit Oundle or some variation in boundaries, but we have to be totally aware of the feelings of other parish councils as well. So I think the informal approach to see where it is, and if there is strong feelings, or there's a hint of strong feelings, as has been suggested here, then that's fine. From the sound of it, if my memory serves me right, there may be an area of semi-agreement with Blackthorn. If that is the case, it needs to be explored. That's Susan.
Thanks. Councillor
Yeah, I would just, obviously, Blackthorn and Arundel have got the strongest issue, I suppose, with at least one house adjoining both. Whereas Barnwell and Ashton have a natural border with the river. But I would have thought that discussing if possible with informally or formally the chair of Barnwell and Ashton as well as Blackthorn, just if there's anything they wanted to put forward, because the four of us working in harmony, particularly if we have the same ward councillors, it just makes sense for us to put the same argument forward, whether that's status quo or slight tweaks. The sooner we do that, I think the better. Because the members, when they start asking for our information in January is when they want it. It's a short period of time.
by way of a bit of information, of course, the same subject came up at Blackthorn's Parish Council meeting last week. And I think that the position there is slightly likely to be, look, we can see that it's actually unsustainable, but if we're going to do that, there are people who are affected by that. And so I think that parish council wants to find a way of ascertaining the views of those affected. My guess is that the residents of Old Farm Lane, at least one couple I know there, would probably not want to move out of Blackthorn because they're very involved with the community of Blackthorn. I suspect most people in the new development are probably blissfully unaware of the situation, but the more financially attuned of them will have figured out that if they move from Blackthorn Parish to Arundel, their council tax bills will go up, because the precept in Blackthorn is appreciably smaller by a margin of goodness knows how many factors than is ours, because it has very little, in a sense, to have to maintain and one part-time clerk, as opposed to a possibly full-time people trying to run a series of properties, etc. I think that if I can liaise with the mayor and see where he's at in terms of the poor and discussing it with people, it should certainly be possible, bearing in mind that I sit on both councils, for me to get Blackthorn and Arundel in a room together at some level. I think it's probably worth a discussion with Barnwell, just in case, for example, their attitude now is, actually would be pleased to be shot of it. I doubt it, but you never know. I'm not sure that any of us have a huge amount of enthusiasm for attempting to make any suggestions about what is currently in the parish of Ashton. And so maybe we simply at this stage say, all right, our first move will be to try and engage with Barnwell and Blackthorn between now and our next meeting, so that I can report back to the next meeting about where they stand in relation to such matters, to see if a combined approach is possible, if it meets both, as it were, their objectives and our own, once we've decided what our own are, and just take it from there. If we're happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay, I will speak with the mayor. That takes us to an item that says discuss planning for parking and decide next steps, which you probably looked at and thought, wonderful. Parking is an issue in the town. there isn't a huge amount of it, and a significant part Longstead car park, which whilst leased by us, is not owned by us, and where the lease is, as leases do, ticking down. And at this stage, we can't be absolutely certain that we would get a further lease of that land, and if so, for how long and so on. And the effect of losing that piece of car parking would be considerable, since I think the common view is there isn't enough parking in the town in the first place. So if we lose one of our major car parks, it's going to be particularly difficult. And it has to be said that there is no immediately obvious alternative that leaps out at one in terms of where we could create another park. We know that NNC are working on their local plan part 2 replacement, looking at the period from 2030 to beyond 2040. And if only we can get the planners to engage with us, which might be a challenge, we should be making the point to them, I feel, that in terms of a planning policy at NNC level, that planning policy should be drafted in such a way as to make it less likely that the Longstead car park could be developed for anything other than a car park. And also that arguably it should look at whether there is any feasibility at all to the provision of any other car parking. I'm at a bit of a loss to think where that could physically be. I don't think NNC have any land under their control, particularly that could become a car park. And I suspect that sourcing car park space, even assuming it was available, significantly further from the centre than the existing car parks, and for that I include the private car park of Waitrose. Might be too much of a challenge because I'm not convinced that people would be prepared to walk in from somewhere. So you might then be looking at, well, can you lay on some sort of transport, like a kind of mini park and ride or something? But I just feel that we should decide as a committee, is this something that we want to take up or try to take up with NNC? Or whether we feel that perhaps this is not an issue for us. So again, I throw it open. Councillor Clark.
I think we saw, didn't we, 12 months ago, 8 months ago, wording somewhere in NNC's draft working plan or something, phrasing around the long-term car park off East Road as being of maybe not community value, but important in planning terms. And I think that's the way into it. And if that's the case,
yeah, it is referred to in the current local plan in that sort of way. So I can't remember the exact wording, but you're right, it is there. And it's certainly something we wouldn't want to lose, and if it could be built on in some way, so much the better.
yeah, so it's absolutely something we should.
I thought we had somewhere established that we had an interest in that land.
Well, I mean, we have a leasehold interest, and I have no inside knowledge as to whether the landlord has any particular plans for it. I mean, it's owned by a pension fund. And pension funds, by and large, aren't run like charitable institutions. It's clearly an investment vehicle.
Yeah.
And how do you get a return out of a car park when you're charging a relatively minimal rent? You are presumably looking for long-term capital appreciation and a development value, which makes me worry that at some point, possibly at the expiry of the lease, we'll be told, no, we want to dispose of that to a builder. That's the issue.
It's a very important issue, but my view on it is quite simple. The council have a transport working group. It's up to them to discuss it and come up with parking options in the round. I don't kind of really see it as a planning committee issue because there's not a planning activity. It's just, I just don't see it's in our remit, personally.
I think in a sense, it is because of the reasons that Councillor Clark says. It is actually referred to within the current local plan, which is the current, if you like, governing document for planning in the area. So it's not like we're stretching out to something else. I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that it's obviously equally a matter for the Transport Working Party. But I think the approach that might be taken by this committee along a planning line is potentially something different to approaches that the TWP might make. For example, TWP might say that discussions should be held with two of the major private car park owners, i.e. Waitrose and AMS. We've both got car parks which are used purely for customers. And of course the school has car parking around the gas school, for example.
I still don't think it's actually really anything to do with this committee. It's Transport Working Group. The fact that there's planning in the title of the document doesn't necessarily mean that it falls naturally here.
Okay. Councillor Quartermain.
I just want to endorse what Councillor Shearer says. Quite honestly, the parking area is extremely important to this town, especially with the strategic objective to increase business, increase footfall of visitors to the town. Without adequate parking, that's going to become quite challenging. But however, I think it is the area of transport in other areas to look at it. And if it comes up that things need to be done, it is at that point that it comes to planning, if that is the case. So that's my view. I think there's other vehicles within the council that can seriously look at the situation.
Thank you.
Nothing from us.
Nothing for you.
The thing which has been discussed in the past is if we were to look to it becoming an asset of community value, and if planning was the correct, which was discussed last time. But if the view is not, then we'll burn that vote as well. But that seems the only other alternative option.
Yes. I mean, that clearly it would have to be it will be a full council decision. I suppose that it's conceivable that either this committee or perhaps more realistically the Transport Working Party might want to recommend to full council the possibility of going down that route. I suppose the thing about assets of community value, we saw to some extent the positive side of that in connection with Fletton Field. On the other hand, the county council couldn't actually get planning permission to develop its own land residentially, which is what it wanted to do, which is why in the end it was prepared to let us have it for a relatively minimal value, valued as a green open space. Of course, if there was asset of community value status here, all that basically does is give the council an opportunity to try and acquire it. But to acquire it at market value, and the market value is actually going to depend on the planning issue, which is, can they get planning to develop it?
I'm just going back to my point was, I think planning will probably have a role in parking down the road. But I think there's areas with transport, maybe other areas will come recommendations, then it will go to full council and we come back to planning. But I think we have enough on our plates at the moment to be able to talk about it. And I think we can, to use the term, kick it down the road a wee bit.
Okay, there's at least 2 members of the Transport Working Party sitting around the table, so potentially wearing other hats, we might talk about it some more. Right, that moves us on to discussing enforcement issues and deciding next steps. One of the enforcement issues that I had wanted to talk about was the large Charles Church sign outside the riverside, only to discover that before we got to the meeting there had been progress in that department. So that one kind of disappears off the radar. There is another enforcement issue, which again, of course, rather got flagged up the other day at full council because of the presentation that we got from our footpath warden, Mr. Hoyle, because there is a planning issue to do with the, well, just call the boat on the river, but I think we all know what I'm talking about, where there really does seem to be a lack of action. And if it is right that NNC are saying there's nothing we can do about the fact that a bridleway is not being used in the right way, I just don't accept that. Those things are designated as such because they're not designated for vehicular access, and if it is being constantly used by a vehicle, it is possible for NNC to take steps to stop it, which could of course include seeking an injunction against the person who's infringing it and damaging the footpath. Now, I think that that's actually an enforcement issue, and we should just go back to enforcement and say, look, you know, this situation's dragged on and on and on, and there are things going on there where there aren't planning permission and where we think there should be, coupled to which there is this misuse of the bridleway, and you should be able to prevent that, if necessary, by the use of an injunction. Unless I'm on a hobby horse and nobody else thinks that we need to do that. So again, I'll throw it open and say, anybody got any views on that particular issue?
I'm getting a bit concerned and confused in that we don't have a paper. We're not being asked to actually make any decisions. I'm not quite sure what it is that we're being asked to do. We just want to have a discussion, have what, I mean.
This is how the thin end of the wedge works. People doing nothing.
Yeah.
Remind me,
That's
Lisa,
The point is that
what have we done, if anything, to date?
We've complained and put an objection into him being permanently moored there, haven't we? Because we said it's set precedent. I can't remember exactly what we said. But this is a new thing. I mean, lots of people still keep phoning me and saying he's adding solar panels, this, that, and the other. These things appearing all the time. But this is a new thing about the footpath being churned up, and this is directly from Tony Moyle, isn't it?
Yeah. But my issue is more of a point of procedure, and that I don't think we can actually make a decision because there's nothing on the agenda that requires us. We're not being asked to make a decision about anything. There's not a paper that maybe I'm just being too pedantic, but
Well, I'll be interested to see what others think. I mean, I thought that discussing enforcement issues, this seems to me to be an enforcement issue, and deciding next steps was clear enough because it wasn't a single issue. If others feel that it actually ought to be done differently, we can put on the agenda next time any specific enforcement issues. But I almost feel that discussing enforcement should be a regular item on the agenda. There may be nothing in a particular month. There may in fact be more times when we don't than we do.
sure.
But triggering enforcement where appropriate is part of our role. And of course, once we've contacted people, we do need to actually see, well, have they responded? And if not, to chivvy them up and if necessary, involve ward councillors and so on. Councillor Clark.
I think also the liaison factor is important because we are probably the closest many residents have as a conduit to NNC, and they're the people that have the enforcement power. And it's boring and it's tedious probably to keep going back over the same thing, but we might be the best people have, and I think we should continue to chivvy as and when. So maybe a standing item to look at what hasn't been enforced on a regular basis is a good idea. But if we keep moaning on at people, then I hope they'll do something about it.
So, I mean, with this specific one that we're talking about, with the bridal way and Crook Path that's been damaged, I'm sure I read something that Tony was going to pursue that. Is that right? I'm sure I read somewhere that he's going to pursue that specific one.
Yeah. I mean, I can speak to Tony, and if there comes a point when he would like the council to, as it were, take that up further, then fine. I don't want to tread on his toes, because we should be very grateful for all that Mr. Hoyle does, both in that role and over the years in so many others, which led to him getting the award the other day. But yeah.
I mean, there's absolutely no harm in, if you want me sending another email as well to enforcement, reiterating this. And I say this to residents that they should complain, because the more people that complain about something.
Exactly. We can then, when we are contacting NNC, saying we're doing so in response to continued concern from local residents.
I get residents phone me regularly. I've had a couple just recently that they think planning breaches are occurring, and have described to me what's happened, and when they can, I ask them to send pictures, and I just send that straight off to enforcement. If it's a next door neighbour that's complaining about their neighbour building what they said was going to be a conservatory, and it's actually a solid structure, and they've dug the garden and all the drains up, that's one that I reported recently in St Peter's Road. And they've gone, and I must admit, I got a very prompt response. I think I reported it last Thursday, and by Monday there was a response from building control saying they'd done a site visit. So I am now going to start copying in building control into things as well, because they seem to respond much quicker than enforcement. So,
That's interesting.
yeah.
And of course, it's useful that you are able to tell us that that's happened. So I think that perhaps reinforces my view that this needs to be some sort of standing item in which Lisa can tell us about anything that we need to be informed about.
I don't know if it's possible because you're a lawyer. My understanding is that there are things like if a piece of land or a path gets used for so many months or something, it's then considered to be that nobody else cares, which is why you have path walkers like Tony to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Yes, I mean, there's two aspects of that. There's the aspect of maintaining, for example, rights by ensuring that they're kept under use. And there's the prospect of acquiring rights by acting as if one has a right and doing so consistently without effectively objection, without having to make payment, etc., whereby you may be able to acquire a right over other person's land.
But if he's made the path partially unusable to footed people rather than a vehicle, he's stopping people from their rights being,
Absolutely. Which I think is the point that
is the point.
Tony Hall is trying
Yeah.
to progress. Well, I'll liaise with Tony over that specific one and we'll see. Councillor Quartermain, I think you were.
Yeah, I just was to endorse the fact, I think it should be a standing area, and I think, certainly in the short time I've been with the council, I've heard numerous times of being, the lack of enforcement and difficulty with enforcement, and the very fact that we can talk about this and continually badger and find the right vehicles to get this, stuff, looked at, the better, so, I'm in favour of that.
Fine. Therefore, are there any other enforcement issues which we should be made aware of? Anything that we're pursuing at the moment?
Just a couple of residential ones where, no, building control applications or planning applications have been sought, but lots of, removal of walls and things like that, and moving windows and things, so just two residential ones at the moment.
Right.
Or one or the other, and it's what you might call street furniture in the marketplace. Because you're following that up as well.
The, street, oh, you mean
I'm
the
using the term
road?
generically.
Yeah, there's been absolutely no movement on that one, even though I've reported it probably a dozen times now from complaints from people. And I've said to them, you know, these regular complaints that we're getting in from people saying how bad things look. So, yeah.
Well, the danger is that it escalates with other traders. I've noticed that the Talbot, which is very unlike the Talbot, is now starting to put all sorts of sandwich boards outside on New Street.
Oh, right,
They normally now have one either side of the courtyard entrance, which has only happened, I think, in recent months. And I can understand why, you know, I mean, because they want to advertise their events, but they're essentially putting it on a public street.
We do, I think, have a policy on
We
A-boards.
do have,
We should be in there
so
somewhere.
natural, we do.
Yeah. Okay. That has covered all the matters that are on the agenda except for any other matters to report. And there's certainly at least one I'm going to raise briefly, but Councillor Chesser.
I don't have anything else.
Councillor Shura. Councillor Clark.
I've been approached by a number of residents with concerns about the large wooden structures appearing in people's gardens on new housing estates. And in each case, I've told them to contact planning enforcement. But there are some very large sheds being put up behind some of the houses on Crossstock there.
So this is where?
Crossstock areas.
Okay.
They're like 8, 9, 10 metres long, wide, 3 metres high.
I was a danger up there.
You're missing out on
Right, yeah. Yes, I mean, that potentially is something where we could use some of our media outlets, shall I say, to perhaps remind people that you can't, which may be the best way of tackling that.
Somebody else.
That's huge.
Maybe. So yeah, that was it.
Maybe this is where they're planning to put the asylum seat.
Well, it's clearly only a temporary structure, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
It says you don't need, it comes under permitted development as long as it's under 15 square metres in floor area, single storey, under the height of 2.5 metres, if within 2 metres of a boundary.
Yeah, and they're all within 2 metres, and probably 3 metres.
I'm quite sure it's just within the limits, isn't it?
Possibly.
Yeah.
That's something. Anyway, that's it.
Right, thank you for that, Councillor Quartermain. There was just one other one which I had originally said I'll put it on the agenda as an agenda item, but it didn't quite make it. One Station Road, which is the listed building onto the Picarthy site. There are a number of bushes, stroke trees, stroke shrubbery outside the frontage of that property. When I first looked at it, I thought these are just growing out of control and they are obscuring large parts of a listed building and they probably aren't doing the listed building any good. And I was going to say that we probably ought to raise this with the conservation officer. But before the meeting could take place, and indeed it was the meeting that then didn't take place, somebody then had a go at them. But the way in which they had a go at them simply made the thing look even worse in my view. And if you look at that structure at the moment, what is there seems to me to detract hugely from the building and is at risk, I would have thought, of damaging it. And I wondered if others had a similar view, and if so, whether we should be contacting the conservation officer saying, take a look at it, and if you agree, you should get on to the owners. Now, I know there's been a sold sign on that for some considerable time, but of course people will remember that there was a planning application not that long ago to restore it as a garage, which application has yet to be determined. Another one that seems to be stuck somewhere in the midst of time there. But I'm assuming that it's probably still the original owner's responsibility to maintain that property whilst they haven't actually sold it, and I suspect they won't actually sell it unless and until somebody gets the planning permission they want. So I just wanted to...
I told John Pick that people have been seen on the site, and he said, right, I'll go and check what's going on.
I mean,
He's the owner still, if he
yeah.
hasn't.
That's a somewhat different issue to these
Bushes.
and trees that I think there are
Well, it
literally
might
4
not
of
be,
them.
might be connected in that sense.
Anybody else noticed them or concerns about them?
Yeah.
Take a look. I'll ask them quite often, they seem, cycle past them, they seem better than they were, but, yeah. Can we decide anything now?
Well, I mean, this isn't specifically on the agenda as an agenda item, and I intended it to be. Let's put it on the agenda for next time. We'll monitor it between now and then, and if there are general concerns about it, we can always flag it to the conservation officer and ask him to take a look, and if he thinks it needs something doing about it, do something about it. Not that we seem to be getting very far with the conservation officer on the issue of the conservation area issue, because we never did get a response. Surprise, surprise. And that really is the last thing from me. For a planning agenda that had literally one plan.
Oh, you said half an hour.
No, I was simply
Completely
responding to
confused.
what Councillor Shaw has said about what was the shortest meeting. I mean, I was aware that there was quite a number of items on there, some of which I thought might take a while, plus the planning application wasn't the most straightforward. But anyway, thank you all for your attendance, and I'll declare the meeting closed.
Can I go home
You
now?
can go home.